Hi, this is Paul Hitchcock with the Estate Asset Protection and Business Planning firm Barth Calderon, and really excited to have landlord attorney Steve Williams of Frieden Williams. Steve, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Great. So this is a big deal that we're jumping into right now, Steve, is that California just, passed a new rule or law. You can tell me where we are with this on rent control for the entire state. So for our audience, what's going on? What's the skinny on this?
Sure. So I've been practicing real estate landlord-tenant law in the Bay Area now for about 20 years. And so I've been, I'm pretty well versed and experienced with landlord-tenant rent control and eviction control issues because several cities here have had it for decades. Now there's an assembly bill. It's Assembly Bill 1482, which is on Governor Newsom's desk right now for signature. And I'm informed that it will become law. It will either be signed or it will not be vetoed, so it will become law at some point shortly, which will have an effective date of January 1st, 2020, and impose rent and eviction control statewide. So, where you typically have your Berkeleys, your San Franciscos, your Santa Monicas, that have traditionally had very, very strict tenant protections and controls for many years. Well, now there's going to be a version that applies throughout the entire state of California. So whether you're in the Central Valley, you're north, you're south, this law will become effective for all jurisdictions. There are a few exceptions to the law, but it basically will impose rent and eviction control across the entire state.
So I have a few questions.
Sure.
So if you have existing laws on the books for San Francisco, Berkeley, now you have a statewide initiative. Does the statewide initiative supersede the local ones, or how are they going to mix together?
Yeah, so this is interesting, and these are some of the nuances that will have to sort of play out over time. But the way it's written right now, if there's an existing rent control ordinance or eviction control ordinance in place locally, like in San Francisco or Oakland, then those controls will continue to apply.
Okay.
And so the new state law will not supersede those particular ordinances. However, if a property is not subject to those local controls or outside of those jurisdictions, then the new law will pick those up and most likely control those particular properties.
So is it all properties then? Single family homes, condos? Is it everything, or is there a breakup?
Yeah, there's a few exceptions. One of them is single family homes or condominiums. The exact language is what's called property that is alienable separate from any other property. So something that you can sell separately, like a home, you can sell that separately from your neighbor's home, or a condo, you can sell that separately from the condo next door to yours. Those particular properties are exempt, but not universally. There are some exceptions to that. They're exempt unless they are owned by a corporation or a real estate investment trust or an LLC that has as a member a corporation. So those are the three exceptions. So generally your mom and pop owners, husband and wife, or an individual, or if you put it in your family trust, or even an LLC for asset protection purposes, so long as a member is an individual, then as the law is written now, those single-family homes or condos will remain exempt from the rent and eviction controls under the new law. And there's also a requirement that the landlord disclose to the tenant that it is exempt for one of those reasons, because it's a single family home. So there's going to actually be a written disclosure requirement that will need to be part of every rental agreement, or if you have an existing tenant in place, then you'll have to give that written disclosure to the tenant before July 1st, 2020. So or by that date. I'm going to tell clients, look, at January 1st, 2020, assuming the law goes into effect, which I assume it will, start making those disclosures now, start including them in your rental agreements now, to preserve that protected status for single family homes or condominiums.
Interesting. And so if you're an owner of an investment property, and I mean, what do you advise them to do at this point, other than what you just said, is to get the language going? But what if they have questions about if it applies to them or not? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty significant law that's going to catch a lot of landlords off guard throughout the state. Now, it has been in the works for a while, but it sure caught a real head of steam this year,
Right?
And just sort of snuck up on some people who weren't following it closely, and most likely, initially, they may want to consult with an attorney. There are various apartment associations that are dialed in and can probably give some information as well, like the California Apartment Association, for instance. That's a statewide association. They've been monitoring this very closely and have had a hand in its development, through the assembly. So that's probably going to be the best bet is one of those organizations, or some sort of landlord or owner association organization locally, or an attorney who's familiar with the new laws.
Yeah, this is a big deal, and that's great information. And my takeaway is get with an expert now to find out, are you affected? What do you have to do? Because I could see potential hornet's nest between landlords and tenants if this isn't handled properly from the get-go.
Yeah, I just want to give a few bullet points. So, believe it or not, there is a retroactive portion of this law. So let me first just tell you sort of what it controls. So eviction control. What it's going to require is that in order to terminate a tenancy, the landlord must have just cause to do so. So for instance, your non-payment of rent, your nuisance, your illegal use, sort of tenant fault types of evictions, those are all still at play. You can evict for a tenant fault, a faulty type of conduct.
Right.
Breach of the lease. Then there's also your no-fault evictions, like the owner wants to move in him or herself, or the owner wants to move a relative into a property that they own. That still is also an elective type basis for an eviction. But simply wanting to sell the property will not be a basis for eviction in California. So you have to have some other just cause. And there's about 14 or 15 just cause provisions or reasons to evict. And in addition, when doing an eviction based on a non-fault, like let's say you want to move in to your unit and you give a notice to terminate the tenancy for that basis, then you have to make a relocation payment to the tenant equal to 1 month's rent.
Wow.
Or alternatively, you can waive the last month's rent when you serve the notice. So there's going to be a relocation payment component. And that's just the just cause provision. Now, the rent control provisions limit rent increases annually to 5% plus CPI. So you're looking at probably, 8%, around 8%, depending on CPI as a maximum increase, but the increase cannot exceed 10%. And the law is retroactive to March 1st, 2019. That if an increase was given between March 1st, 2019 and January 1st, 2020 that exceeds 5% plus CPI, well, guess what? The rent will be rolled back to the amount the rent was March 1st, 2019,
Wow.
plus 5% plus CPI. So it's going to have some retroactive effect on some increases that were given during this time.
I wonder if this precedent by California doing this is going to have some ripple effects on other states. What do you think about that?
Well, Oregon, believe it or not, last year passed statewide rent control. I'm informed that Nevada is at least considering it as well. So yeah, California typically is on the forefront. There's a few states typically that sort of lead the way with this sort of legislation. So I would definitely expect that there will be other jurisdictions at least considering it and possibly tempting the idea of rent controls.
Right. Steve, great information. Really appreciate you coming on and let everybody know what the story is, and look forward to having you back on to keep us updated on this very hot issue.
Yeah, so just keep your eyes out. And like I said, I expect Governor Newsom will sign it or it will go into effect. And then just be prepared January 1st, 2020 to have all your ducks in a row and make sure you're in compliance with this new statewide law.
Great input. Thanks, Steve.
All right, no problem.